This is part 2 of decision making and problem solving. I want to tell you about a client that I saw yesterday in my private practice. He's a 47-year-old male. He's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He grew up in a very fundamentalist home. His father is a fundamentalist, was a fundamentalist preacher, minister. He had a number of stepsisters, foster kids who came and lived with him and the family. He became sexually active with one of them when he was 14. And of course, this was his family found out about it. They shamed him about it. This led into really a lifelong addiction to pornography and sexual acting out. At age 18, he went into the Navy, but he didn't like it. He was failing out and into the Naval Academy. And so he made up a story that he was called by God to be a minister so that he could get out of the Navy. He was released from the Navy, given an honorable discharge, and for 30 years he lied to his wife about this issue, and he was a minister and hated it because he knew in his heart that he had not been called by God to the ministry. So I saw him just yesterday in my private practice, and he told me this story, and he said this was the first time I had ever told anybody. He's never told his ex-wife. He's never told anyone about the part about being called by God to the ministry. So as a therapist, then I need to figure out what to do with him, how to help him. There are a number of theories that could guide me, including psychodynamic theory, cognitive behavioral theory, trauma-informed theory. There's lots of places that I could go with him, and this is a very kind of layered client that I have. He has a lot going on here. So I wanted to, tell you about him because I think this is an example of where I have to do some searching about how best to help him. So I have to make some decisions and I have to problem solve. So when I'm doing that, I'm looking at my preferred theories. Is there a theory? Is there a therapy out there that's guided toward his level of trauma? This is a very vivid kind of client that I'm working with. His story was it drew me in, and I was kind of honored that after all these years he would choose to tell that story to me as his therapist. So it was a very vivid kind of story that he was telling. But I have to make some judgments, and so have I had other clients like him? How do I approach this very complex kind of man who's sitting in front of me? Does he belong to a certain group? Well, he's not involved in a church anymore. It's something he struggles with, though. Religion's very hard for him. He feels like he's a spiritual person, but he has a lot of damage and a lot of baggage from his growing up time. So I have to take all of this into account as well. So the things that I have to avoid with this client is that I don't want to jump to conclusions. I don't want to, just disregard other things that are going on with him. I certainly don't want to get it all involved in his historical stuff if he is manic or if he's not on medication, if he's not sleeping. To me, those are the first things that I should really address, and I do address. So I'm looking for resources that he has. His current wife is very good to him. They have a good relationship. I have to implement some kind of a plan, but I need his help in doing that. I have to evaluate the results. So is what I'm doing helping him in therapy? Again, this is a very layered kind of thing. He's not suicidal currently. I always check that out. He's not manic. He's working. He's not sleeping great, but he's trying. So these are all things that I sort of look for as I'm proceeding with him in therapy. So errors, again, I can make errors. So if I believe that he's bipolar, someone along the line told him that he was, I may look for data that confirms that. So I may say, this guy looks kind of manicky, where he may not be manicky. He just may be excited about something, or he may be depressed about something. Who wouldn't be growing up in a situation like that? There's lots more to this case too that I won't get into here, but I have to be careful about jumping to conclusions and watching my kind of initial assumptions. He's part of a cultural subgroup, I would say, of fundamentalist Christians. He grew up that way, so I have to know something about that. I have to address that in my treatment of him. I have to make sure that I describe him to his psychiatrist, to other people that I work with. I have to make sure that I describe him correctly. So, I could say, well, this guy, this guy's really manic, and so the psychiatrist would, of course, try to, if they believed me, would try to put him on some sort of a Depakote or something like that. When again, he may not be manic. He may just be really upset about all of this stuff from his past that's working on him. I may inaccurately predict that he is going to be addicted to pornography the rest of his life. He's married again, has a new wife. He's not into pornography now. They have a good sexual relationship. So again, I can look at his past and make some predictions, but not all predictions. Impulsiveness and kind of doing things in a mindless way is something that I try to avoid in my practice, and I want you to avoid in your practice. This kind of narrow thinking. We've talked in other classes about how the DSM-5 tends to put people in boxes. Well, humans are much more complicated than a simple diagnosis, and so I want you to be very clear about your diagnosing, about the way that you talk about your clients in practice. I want you to make sure that you know what you're talking about, and don't be lazy. Describe them in an accurate way. Don't kind of wander aimlessly about trying to figure out what they are. Make sure that it's precise, using their words and enlisting them in helping you with their treatment. So in clinical practice especially, I tend to think about all the people that I've helped. There are a few people that I haven't helped, and in fact, I hope that I haven't hurt them too bad, but I've failed in treating them. And so I want to remember them, and I want to not stereotype people. I think that's very dangerous to stereotype people. Sometimes we get anxious in our practice, and so we have trouble remembering the failures that we have. So if I can give you some advice, if you want to be a clinical social worker in therapy, I would say that you need to slow down the process. When you're in the room with somebody, make sure that you're paying attention. Make sure that you're checking for all the big stuff like suicide and abuse and that sort of those sorts of things. But slow the process down a little bit. Make sure that you're focusing, that you're thinking as they're talking, that you're not daydreaming, that you're not stereotyping them. We tend to think of ourselves as really important. Sometimes we are important in people's lives, other times we're not. We may think that we know people better than they know us or better than they know themselves. That's a very dangerous kind of situation to get into. And so again, don't over-exaggerate your importance, but strive to be complete and accurate in the way that you talk about people. So in this class, especially, we're talking about being aware of how you're thinking, organizing your thinking, being reflective on your thinking, and not just jumping to conclusions, not believing everything that somebody tells you, not buying into fallacies that maybe your coworkers have about clients or other people that you serve. You'll make mistakes. It's okay. But I want you to take the attitude of learning from your mistake. I think it was Henry Ford that said the worst mistake is something that you don't learn anything from. And so, you will make mistakes. You're not perfect, but I want you to learn how to recognize them, how to embrace kind of this self-critical attitude. And I'm not talking about getting down on yourself. I'm talking about not holding yourself out as someone who knows all of the answers. I think that's a very dangerous place to be. There are some avoidable mistakes, certainly. If you are assessing someone for suicide, you need to be really careful about that because they could die if you mess up. There are some unavoidable mistakes, though, as well. Again, you're not going to do everything correctly. Just make sure that you focus on the big things and that you communicate to your coworkers, that you do good charting, that you do good assessment of the people that you work with, and that you make the best decision that you can at that time. And ultimately, there are a lot of questions in front of us. But I want you to embrace those questions. Don't be afraid of them and learn from them.